ECU Journalism Instructor Chuck Torty joins us now. Chuck, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So in light of the events yesterday in Boston, we often find as the press, as the media, kind of taking a step back and looking at how we covered especially events of this magnitude. Mm-hmm. As an instructor of our trade, what are your thoughts? And one of the biggest concerns people have in events like this, I think, is the media coverage can tend to lead to copycat things of that sort. And does this 24-hour news cycle that we live in nowadays, does that unfortunately play a role in that, do you think?
Well, I think it does, yeah. I think the copycat concern is a real one. It's something I think we just have to live with because you have to report the news. My main concern is the wall-to-wall coverage that just doesn't seem to end.
Right.
You see the same footage over and over again. Anchors say the same thing over and over again. They're looking for something to say. Nobody's actually doing any reporting. They're just talking about it. And I'd much rather just break in, give the news that we have, talk about it a little bit, go back to the regular programming, and come in when you've got some new news.
And it really kind of started, I think you've got to go back 30 plus years to the advent of CNN and the 24-hour news network, that when things really started to change. I mean, now it's an entirely new ballgame because you've got a half a dozen of them across the spectrum on your cable channel that they've got 24 hours of news to fill.
Right. And nobody wants to get beat.
No, that's right.
And that's a good thing. I mean, they shouldn't want to, but what happens, I think, is people see it and they get more afraid. And in an odd sense, it plays into whatever, and we're assuming these are terrorists who did this. Well, it's terrorizing people more. You know, it's all that's on TV. And, you know, particularly if you are at home all day and all you have on is Fox or CNN or whatever, that's all you see. And it just plays into the fear of these events.
It's hard, you know, and I speak for us here at WNCT when we cover things like this. We have discussions, at-length discussions. The last thing you want to be is alarmist. The last thing you want to do is cause a panic. But at the same time, you've got to inform the public. People have a right to know what's going on. But then I think you're towing a fine line when the event itself is as alarming as it is.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, I think maybe then you start looking for different angles. And again, you know, you don't want to just be on air all the time saying the same things over and over again. But, and I know you guys in particular do a fine job working with social media. Well, there were a lot of things going on, I noticed last night on Twitter. You know, people were offering their homes in Brookline in Massachusetts to people who needed them. And so you can report on things like that, say, the other angles of the story. Also, you know, it seems like this particular event, and of course I can't be in the mind of whoever did it, but, you know, it seemed to be designed for maximum impact. And also for an event where there were thousands of people from all over the country. So I noticed that the Daily Reflector had a story today about some people from Greenville who had been at the race. The East Carolinian, the student newspaper at ECU, had a similar story. So there are those kind of stories out there too.
To localize a big story.
To localize it, exactly, and to talk about something other than the same clip running over and over again. And I know that means that you've got to go off air and do some reporting in the meantime, but that's probably all for the good if you do that.
One of the other, and we were talking before we started rolling here, one of the other pitfalls of that 24-hour cycle is misinformation. And a lot of times, because you've got air to fill, because you're trying to get people the information as fast as they want it and you think they need it, that you're reporting things before you have really anything confirmed. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the major networks like CNN, even the AP has fallen to this. And then what happens is local affiliates like ourselves, I don't think we were guilty of it yesterday, but sometimes the local channels follow suit and start saying the same thing when we're hearing this, when in fact, it's not true.
Right, and the case of the poor Saudi student who was picked up at the scene yesterday, and right away people started reporting that, well, the police have a man in custody, and most of the time they were very careful to say, well, we don't know that he's involved, but it still doesn't help to put that in people's minds, that, well, they've got somebody, and a lot of people will think that's what it is. It was a Saudi guy, and apparently it wasn't. We don't know yet, but yeah, I mean, just the chance for misinformation to get out there is great, and it's something we need to be careful about.
With the saturation, do you think a lot of times victims are forgotten? It seems to me, if you think back to a lot of these events, you remember Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, you remember Adam Lanza, you remember the names of the people responsible for these things, yet it's tough for people to come up with the name of somebody who died in one of these attacks.
Right. And that's a tough thing. You have to tread a very careful line. A lot of times people who have just been involved in some tragedy like this, their family members or survivors, don't want to talk about it. And so you're left just concentrating on the perpetrator when we know who it is. And that's something that, you have to tread this very careful line, but I think you need to try to find out more about the people who were involved in this, the victims, and whatever way you can do to reach out to them. And it may be that, nowadays it's not a matter of just walking up to them with a notebook or a camera or a microphone, but trying to reach them through other means, for instance, through social media. I remember when the shooter attacked at Virginia Tech 5 or 6 years ago now. I think several of the networks set up Facebook pages and invited people to tell their stories and come to us that way, and that may be a good intermediary way to reach people, the victims, and not have to confront them right away and perhaps upset them. You're right, those stories need to be told.
They do. And are these the kind of things you're talking about with your students these days, and how to effectively use social media? Because I know, looking back, when I went through college, Twitter didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist. These are tools, while they too have their pitfalls, they're also very useful in a sense for journalists these days.
Yes, I do talk about that in my classes. And I point out that there are many pitfalls with it, and you can't believe everything that you find online. But that they are tools and that they can be useful that way. And, I think my students are beginning to understand that. They use social media a lot, they're online a lot, but they don't always know the proper way to use those resources, which sources they can trust and which they can't. And they don't think of them as resources for reporters, which they have become.
Finally, I want to get your thoughts on our obligation to inform the public, to let them know what's happening, to inform them of potential threats, but again, not getting into the mode of alarmist and setting off a panic.
That's a very careful line you have to tread there.
It is, because there's a lot of times you want to say, look, this happened. Hey, maybe this could happen down the road. If it happened, again, if it happened here, it could happen there. I mean,
yeah, you don't want to tell people how to feel about it, but it almost might be a good thing to just say every now and then, calm down. It's not the end of the world. This is horrible, but we have to put this in perspective. And for instance, speaking of online, a friend of mine posted something on Facebook today, an article, I think from The Atlantic, online, that said basically that, calm down. And what it turns out is, really, these events, when they happen, they're horrible, of course, but they don't happen all that often. And terrorists aren't all that successful. They're usually not very smart to begin with. And perhaps if we remind people of that along the way, too, that as much as it seems like it happens all the time, whether it's terrorism or a shooting of some other kind, that in general, we're not under attack. Everything isn't falling apart around us. And that may be part of our job in this business, to remind people of that every now and then too.
Excellent. Chuck, appreciate it. Thanks
Oh,
for your
sure,
time,
my pleasure.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah.